All right, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're out on the West Coast. And welcome to the webinar hosted by AIPIP. This is how to improve PI patient compliance and increase your marketability by avoiding case killers. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to attend, and we're going to give everyone just a couple of seconds here to settle in. And while you're doing that, if you could do me a favor, on the right-hand side, you see a gray questions box. If you can just go ahead and type in with okay or yes, for those of you that are here right now, and let me know that we're coming through loud and clear, that would be great. I would appreciate that. And also in that box, if you have any questions during the course of this webinar, that's where you're going to put your questions, and then we're going to get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So, yeah, it looks good. Looks like we are coming through loud and clear. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. You see our panel of presenters, and we're going to get to everybody here today. All right, very good. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover in this presentation. Very excited about this. This is an important topic for your PI cases, and make sure that you have a pen and paper ready to take plenty of notes on this. The single most important thing that we're going to cover here is keeping your cases viable and collectible without spending a lot of time and effort in doing this, even if you don't do a lot of personal injury. And doing those procedures and keeping your cases viable and collectible is going to help everyone involved. And it also increases your marketability. If that's something that you're interested in, is marketing yourself to PI attorneys in your area, just through your actions and your procedures that you have on your PI cases can help your marketability. Now, if you're not familiar with viable or collectible, those are two really important things about a PI case, and we're going to hear from an attorney later on about the importance of that. But keeping your cases going to the end and then having the collectability factor are extremely important. So let's go ahead and get started. What is a PI case killer? Does it really kill cases? Am I being overly dramatic? I don't know. You tell me. But what it is defined are issues or situations or problems that can come up or present themselves at any point in a PI case or in a patient's plan of care. But the thing that's most important about it is they have to be cleaned up or eliminated, or they can decrease the value of a claim or the outcome potential or the settlement. So there are many different types of PI case killers, and I'm going to give you some examples here in just a minute, but being able to recognize that these are problems or situations, the awareness is the first step in the process of being able to overcome them. If you're not aware that these are even issues, like most providers, you're just going to blow right past it and not realize that the far-reaching and sometimes devastating consequences these can have on their cases. And remember, as I mentioned just a second ago, these can come up at any time. It doesn't have to be at the beginning. It could be at the middle. It can even be at the end. And it can be on any given case. The important thing also to keep in mind here is at least an attempt should be made to correct these, identify these, and correct these. And we're going to give you some very actionable items here throughout the course of this presentation from each one of the presenters. So here are just a few of the common case killers. Now, these are not the only ones. These are just a few that I put on here. And if you've been in practice and doing PI for any length of time, I'm sure that many of you are going to recognize these. Now, delays in treatment onset. We've all had cases with this particular issue. For example, after a crash, or the accident or injury, there's a time frame before the patient initiates formal care and treatment. So there's a time from the actual incident to the onset of formal care. Now, the more time that passes from the injury to care, the more difficult it becomes for everyone involved. But delays in the onset of treatment can definitely have a negative impact on the case. Gaps in a plan of care. Once again, if you're doing this kind of work, you know that patients can disappear or not really adhere to the plan. And we've all had cases with this as well. In a nutshell, it's patient non-compliance with you or the provider recommended plan of care. This is a big case killer. Now, especially if there are more than one of these case, one unexplained or uncorrected gaps, that's going to be problematic later on. Ideally, your cases should not even have one, and that's kind of the point of today's presentation, is to make sure you don't have any of these case killers, and we're on gaps here, but make sure that you're looking for these in your cases. Another common case killer is clinical documentation, and this is literally a whole webinar in itself, all the documentation mistakes that so many providers make on their PI cases. And this can include things like missing patient symptoms, or poor or substandard daily treatment notes, or high or even low pain scales for an extended period of time. I could go on for the whole time just on this one section, but I'm not going to. The next one on the list here is diagnoses, and missing diagnoses is a very common case killer and has a very far-reaching effect on the case. A good example of this would be TBI or SLAP lesions or ligament instability injuries. Underdiagnosing your cases is very common. Incorrect or inappropriate diagnoses, that's also part of it. Failing to diagnose. This is one that, again, significantly impacts cases. Another one is advanced imaging, and more specifically on this one, not incorporating advanced imaging into your management. This has another far-reaching effect. Another one here is professional communication, not keeping attorneys updated or informing other providers if you're doing co-management, which is a big part of personal injury, informing the other providers that you may be referring to what you want them to do with your patient at a consult or referral. These are all very fixable, by the way. A few others that are not on this list here: case management, reasonable bills and treatment, that can have an effect on the case. Co-management, as I mentioned, working together with other healthcare providers is extremely important in PI. Here's another good one. Your patient's use of social media. Now, I don't know how many of you even had that conversation, but telling you one thing about your injuries and then having pictures of them out there water skiing. So they're coming in and making all kinds of complaints, and then all of a sudden on their Facebook or Instagram, there's these all kinds of pictures, or they make statements about their big upcoming settlement, or they're going to make $1 million from their PI claim. These all have an impact, and we can go into each one of these individually. So as you can see, there's a lot of possibilities of why your PI cases can go south, sideways, and all of it can make it difficult for your patients to receive care and the treatment that they need. This can affect your reimbursement and really handicap an attorney's ability to settle cases for fair value and make their clients whole. So there's a lot going on here. One other point that I want to bring up before we get into some specifics is it really doesn't matter if you do a lot or a little personal injury. Sometimes there's a self-justification that because I don't do a lot of PI, I don't really have to do some of these things that maybe we've already discussed. But as a provider, you have a responsibility in your cases, and it goes beyond the treatment aspect and getting your patient better. And that's what we're going to focus on here. Now, the one that we're going to drill down on is gaps in care. This is the one that we're going to focus on this webinar, what we're going to discuss with the panel, whom you're going to meet in just a couple of minutes. But before we get into the specifics, I just want to share with you, I want to briefly introduce myself. There's a lot of people on this webinar that are new, have never been to an AIPIP event, a seminar or a webinar or one of our trainings. My name is Scott Tauber, and I'm the COO and Director of Education at the American Institute of Personal Injury Physicians. And AIPIP is a personal injury specific consulting company. And we work directly on this part of your practice, no matter how much personal injury you may currently be performing in your office. And we work with both providers and attorneys, helping them improve their cases and their outcomes. I'm a national speaker on the subject of personal injury, presenting to providers of all specialties and experience across the US at state events, med legal conferences, and even through our own seminars and webinars, just like this one here. And at AIPIP, we help remove the confusion or aggravation related to the PI portion of your practice. You already know that if you're a provider, you're listening to this, you already know that none of us learned this in our professional training. None of us learned this in school. And even if you did, it's already outdated and antiquated. So you kind of have to pick this up once you're out into practice. And this winds up costing providers a lot of aggravation and a lot of money as well over time. And we also help to improve your confidence with this part of your practice and accelerate your marketability with med legal professionals and increase your PI related revenue and profitability. So if you're looking to become a go-to doc in your area, somebody that can be relied upon by those med legal professionals, then that's what we help you with. Just real quick, I've been featured in PI journals and been published in national publications. And just like many of you, I've maintained an active clinical practice for over 20 years. I've also been a PI consultant and expert witness in the med legal arena with the auto insurance carriers, state regulatory agencies, and have been an expert as well in medical malpractice cases. I want you to know that every day around the United States and practically every state, providers just like yourself are using what we're about to dig into here in this particular webinar to improve their cases, improve their PI case management, and expand their relationships with med legal professionals in their communities. Now, I'm telling you this not to brag or boast, but to give you the confidence that what we're about to cover can benefit your cases and your practice, because this is what I do all day, every day, and it's exactly what the panel presenters do all day, every day as well. And we can help you do the same thing for your cases. Now, with that in mind, what is a gap? What's a gap in a plan of care? Well, it's basically a break in a formal plan. Now, when a patient comes in, you put them on a schedule. You make recommendations. You say, I want you to come in 3 times a week for 4 weeks. And the patient either complies with that or they don't. And this can happen at any point. Doesn't have to happen at the beginning, as I mentioned. But even if they're missing visits regularly, or there's an unexplained absence for an extended period of time, what you want to do is you want to anticipate these with your PI patients. You should write this down and start thinking about some of the steps that we're going to discuss to have in place so you anticipate these. We already know, again, we've all practiced, patients are going to miss, but it's what we do about it. We anticipate them missing, we're prepared, and understand that if they do miss, they're non-compliant, there's a break, what do we do? We've all had patients that have had pre-planned vacations, right? An accident or an injury never comes at a good time. The patient gets into an accident and in 2 days they're leaving to go on vacation for 3 weeks. Or I've also had, and I'm sure you have had as well, patients that are compliant and all of a sudden their business changes or their work hours change and it's not convenient. And all of a sudden they can't make it in to your office. So a gap in care, simply stated, is non-compliance. And there are reasons why. And some of these scenarios here, like a pre-planned vacation or work hours, may seem reasonable or there's a rationale, but it's what we do about it to eliminate these gaps. But I want you to think about this for a second. Look at this gap or this non-compliance from the insurance carrier's point of view, whether it's a first party or third party. The patient needs to take their injury seriously enough to make an effort to get treatment, because if the patient doesn't take them seriously, the carrier is not going to take them seriously either. And there are ways that we can overcome that. And let's go ahead and talk about that, at least from a clinical perspective. How do we overcome some of this? Well, here are some steps that you can take. The first one is to recognize and identify the gap. Seems simple enough, but how many of you have been in practice and all of a sudden you realize a couple of, maybe a day or a week or 2 weeks, you go, where has Mrs. Jones been? I haven't seen her in a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden everybody realizes Mrs. Jones hasn't been in for a couple of weeks. Now, I know that's happened to you because it's happened to a lot of providers, including myself. You can't keep track of everybody, but the first step is you have to be able to recognize it and identify it in your cases. And everyone in your office should be on their toes about recognizing this with PI specific. Next, you can educate your patients in your report of findings. I'm sure everyone here does a report of findings about, what's wrong with you and how long it's going to take and how many visits and how much it's going to cost. Educate your patients. Discuss this in the report of findings, that there may be a time or a possibility where they can't come in, and what should they, the patient, do about it if they can't make their appointments. At least put it out there and put it into your PI report of findings. Next, home care. No one should be leaving your office on day one without home care. Now, there are a lot of reasons to prescribe home care on visit number one, but for the purpose of this presentation, home care is one of the ways that gaps can be eliminated from a documentation perspective. Another thing that you can do is train your team members. Your team, not you necessarily, but your team at the front desk, on the phone, your staff that does your therapies or your assistants is the first line of defense. And they're the first to recognize when a patient is missing appointments or repetitively rescheduling. So what you're going to want to do here is train them, and then train them again, and then train some more about this process, especially the person that's on the phone, either handling the changes in scheduling or the calls in from the patient where they can't come in and they have to miss. Communicate regularly is another thing that you can do, both with the patient if they're in a gap scenario, but especially with the representing attorney. If your patient is being represented by an attorney, the attorney wants to and needs to know the status of this particular case and their client. So many providers continue to call the patient, and we've all seen where the patient says, oh, okay, I'll be in on Wednesday, and then they don't show up on Wednesday. You call them, oh, I'll be in on Friday, and they're not coming on Friday, and then all of a sudden a week goes by, and it's 2 weeks, and the attorneys don't want to be surprised. Nobody wants to be surprised in personal injury, but especially attorneys. They don't want to open up a case or a file from you 6 months down the road and realize that there's things going on in there that could have easily been corrected. Are you familiar with the acronym or the letters WTF in the world, right? You know what that means? When an attorney opens up the file and they see that there's been gaps or issues, that's what goes through their mind, like WTF. So here's an example. Say the attorney referred the client to your office, and they have an idea of the potential case value, and then a few months later your file comes in with gaps and other issues, and there's been no communication. Well, nothing sours that relationship faster than that issue, but especially since in their mind, if they had known about these issues, if the provider had communicated, they could have possibly intervened and helped this case avoid going down the dumper, right? So avoid all of these issues if they had known about it. This can also result in affect your reimbursement. You might have a reduction request coming in your direction. So communication helps significantly. Let's look at an actual case example here real quick. Look at the top date. That's the date of service, 12/1. And then you see the second arrow over here, 11/26. This is actually a delay. This is not necessarily a gap, but this is from the accident to, so here we have about 5 days. That's considered a delay out in PI land. So we have to eliminate that. Then we get into the actual care, and we already have a missing week right here from 12/1 to 12/8, and then we have another one over here. So right at the beginning, this patient's already non-compliant, and there's a whole other issues going on these notes. I don't want you to focus on that. That's a whole nother webinar. But look at the delay already, that's not explained, and the gap in care that's not explained. So to recap here, we defined a gap, we provided several elimination steps, we just gave you a quick example of a gap and even a delay. And the last thing I want to cover here before I bring on our panel of experts is, what are your in-office takeaways and your action steps? Awareness would be number one. Another thing that you can do is weekly PI staff meetings. I know sometimes when I mention staff meetings, people just cringe. Have weekly PI staff meetings. This way, nothing gets out of control more than 7 days. And train your staff to also, another here, little clinical pearl, is when a patient comes back from a gap or an issue, plan for a little extra time so you don't feel rushed. Create a process, have systems and a safety net. Over on the right-hand side, you see something that our clients use as kind of a guide. It's an algorithm on what to do. The key here from a clinical also is to document thoroughly. The first visit back from any gap, take some time so you can eliminate that. And that's usually with what kind of home care or what did they do away from the office. And that comes back to why you want to give home care. So many providers are just so excited that the patient came back and they're back on track that they jump right back into treatment and don't even realize that there's some steps that you have to take to eliminate this issue when the patient does come back. And then finally, be proactive. Avoid alienating your referral sources. If the attorney sent them to you, you don't want to make them angry and give them a reason why they don't want to send any more clients to you. So these are a lot of different things that you can do in your office, starting with awareness all the way through these processes and these procedures and your documentation and your home care. Now, there's another way to help eliminate these gaps, and I want to bring on our next presenter here to take this a little bit further. And our next presenter is from Compliant Clients, Servam Patel, and he is a board certified pharmacist and founder of Compliant Clients. He uses his medical training to help identify gaps in a patient's plan of care and treatment. And Compliant Clients ensures that all injured patients have access to the transportation and injury-related medications to help them recover from their accident. In addition, patients are able to access optimal treatment and avoid undue medical deterioration during their legal actions. And he's more than just a pharmacist. He considers himself to be a true advocate for PI patient litigants. So our next presenter here is going to be Dr. Patel, and I'm going to turn it over to him. If you do have any questions, remember to go ahead and type them into the questions box. And so I'm going to share my screen with him. And welcome to the webinar, Doc.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chopper, for that introduction, and good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're at. Let us get started. on this presentation, as you know, we are talking about how to avoid case killers. So the concept of case killers is not new to any of us. Back when we were all in grade school, there was a brown bear that was educating us about what? Prevention. Smokey the Bear did not say, only you can take a fire blanket into a forest or a bucket of water in a forest and put out forest fires. No, he said, only you can prevent forest fires. So the concept we're focusing on is how about we improve case outcomes by focusing on preventing gaps in treatment that may occur in the first place. There's two areas that we're going to focus on in this presentation, and it's just to raise awareness of what kind of gaps can occur due to transportation or pharmacy issues. This next slide, it's more for attorneys to relate to. Attorneys, they can have a great case. There can be clear liability, a big 18-wheeler crash, there's witnesses, a police report, but all that goes down the drain if that same client is missing appointments due to not having a ride after their accident, or that same client may have made their appointments, but they're being non-compliant with their prescription-related regimen. So let's raise some awareness about how often people are missing rides. Some people don't know that up to 3.6 million Americans are missing rides due to not having transportation. And on the healthcare provider level, I'm sure most healthcare providers know, but just in case you don't know, clients who miss or patients who miss even one appointment with you, they're more likely to just stop being a patient altogether. It is already so hard to get new patients. It's important for all healthcare providers to prevent existing patients from slipping through the cracks, especially when the attrition was preventable in the first place. And this is definitely beyond the dollar. Right now, a lot of us, we're just thinking about how to improve the PI case outcomes and get a bigger settlement check, but we also need to focus on clinical outcomes as well. Patients who miss appointments, they just don't get better as quickly. There's lots of different barriers to transportation in PI. Most people think it's, oh, this guy doesn't have a ride because they don't have a secondary car at home. A lot of times that's not even the case. They might have a second car at home, but maybe they need wheelchair accessible transportation because of the type of accident they're in. Or maybe they just don't feel comfortable driving that far to the doctor's office, or maybe they're in an area where there's lack of public transportation. A lot of people, they can't go to work after their ride or after their accident, and so that way they can't even afford transportation in the first place. There are definitely no formal studies that have been conducted on PubMed or anywhere similar that says this is how many PI patients have gotten into an accident and therefore don't have a ride. But you might be thinking, so then how common is it? Well, I did a simple Boolean search on Google saying missed appointments and added it into car accident. A lot of attorneys are posting on it. And to this point, we've been doing it for 4 years. We have over 2,000 cases under our belt that prove that this is definitely a missed opportunity area for a lot of personal injury victims. Outside of just transportation, of course, there's different ways that healthcare providers can focus on and different offerings they can give to their patients so they prevent from not showing up to their appointments. I can definitely share this slide a little bit later on, but at the end of the day, the main point is if you give your patient choices and if you minimize their reasons to miss an appointment, it's going to help you and the case better off. In general, transportation's role in healthcare access can be seen in this table. A patient who does have transportation to their appointment, of course, they're going to not have a gap in treatment. They're going to have access to their medications in real time. They'll be able to take their medications as soon as the prescription is written. And in general, there's going to be improved health outcomes and prevention, of course, of further complications down the road due to non-compliance. This slide is more for attorneys than anyone else. Most attorneys that I talk to, they are under the impression that transportation is a case cost. A lot of attorneys and even healthcare providers, they're paying for these rides out of pocket and they just have to eat the cost themselves. But when you have a third-party company do it like we do, it's not looking as like you're inducing treatment or anything like that. A third-party company is handling it all, and all of our bills are recoverable and compensable in personal injury cases. They're just as valid as any other chiropractic, surgery, or pharmacy bill will be. Switching gears to pharmacy, a lot of people definitely at least know in the news that PBMs are coming under scrutiny and drug prices are increasing every year. No one really knows how much, but that's why I decided to put a slide in here to let you know that drug prices are increasing every single year. Up to 40% more Americans are struggling to pay for the cost of medications, even though pretty much everyone has access to some type of health or prescription insurance program. Around one third of Americans right now, they are actually skipping filling a medication because of the cost. And around 36% have said their prescription cost definitely has gone up in the past year. Not many people are saying it's gone down. Around 18% are saying because of the rising rate of prescription medication costs, they're having trouble paying for other necessities like paying their rent or paying the food bill. And around 42% have said, hey, paying for medications is somewhat or can be very difficult. So just because somebody has pharmacy or health insurance doesn't mean they have readily available access to their medications. And without transportation or pharmacy support, a case can definitely become harm, because when a patient gets into an accident and they have a record of noncompliance, like Dr. Tauber already referred about, a lot of admin duties are having to be done at the personal injury staff level to go and make up for this gap in treatment. Oh, we got to get this person in to see the doctor right away. Oh, they're not taking their medications, they're scrambling. There's a fire that they have to put out that could have been prevented in the first place. And because all of this has happened, the length of the case continues to drag on. They can't put the demand package together. The defense has more and better arguments to fight to lower the value of the claim, and you're forced to settle for the less than optimal outcome. If your client needs transportation or pharmacy support, and you offer that to them at the very beginning of the case, and you are able to prevent this gap in treatment from occurring in the first place, it just makes your case that much stronger. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that patients who make their appointments, they don't miss them. There's no gap in treatment. If the prescription medication is prescribed today and they fill it today, it's going to help their case, and it's going to prove and document their pain and suffering. We offer lots of different types of transportation. It's not just private sedan. We work with companies like Lyft and Uber. Our pharmacy card is accepted everywhere, like CVS, Walgreens, Amazon. We do flights, we do hotels. We are a white glove service company. Law firms and healthcare providers have a lot more important things to do than ensuring that their clients are making it to and from their appointments and that they're taking their medications on time as prescribed. And that's the only thing we do. We work everywhere around the nation. We're accepted in all 50 states. And again, it's very transparent pricing for all. There is no cost to the medical provider. There is no cost to the law firm. The injured victim, we do everything under a letter of protection or lien, so they don't pay anything up front either. As far as enrolling a client goes, for law firms, they just go to our website, they fill out a form. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes to fill out. Our case managers approve it in under 15 minutes, and they can start requesting rides the same day, and as well getting their prescription card activated the same day. Again, scheduling rides and missed medical treatments is going to cost everybody time, money, and eventually their case. It's not something that should be ignored at all. So for healthcare providers, you might be thinking, well, what is the biggest takeaway? What can I do here? The best thing to do is ask your patients. When you know you're having a personal injury patient come in for an appointment, before they even come in, confirm. Do you have transportation to and from this appointment? Do you have prescription coverage? Can you afford your copays and deductibles? And if not, pick up the phone or visit our website and we'll coordinate coverage with that law firm. And for on the law firm side, the law firm should be asking these types of questions during case intake. It might be a great case, but you need to make sure they also have reliable transportation to and from their appointments. And they have some type of prescription insurance coverage. And even if so, are they still able to afford their copays and deductibles, or would they like to bill it to the case? These are some reference we had from the slides earlier. And I just want to end with just saying, if you are interested, if you think whatever I'm saying resonates with you, our services resonate with you, with the need that you have, we'll send you an email after this shortly. You can quickly use it to book a call. More than happy to answer any questions you have. And thank you again, Dr. Tauber, for letting me educate our audience on this commonly overlooked topic. And I really look forward to being on more webinars with you guys in the future.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Doc. A couple of good points here that, what I wrote down here. First of all, being proactive is always better than being reactive. So the good point that I heard here is work this, we mentioned report of findings, work this into your report of findings. Ask your patient during your report of findings, Do you have transportation issues? Do you have reliable transportation? I've seen cases where patients just can't make it. They have to take the bus. They have to change buses. Then after a while, they're in pain and they don't want to, spend their day going around on public transportation. And so they don't make their appointments. It has a negative impact and a direct impact on the case. So be proactive, work this into your report of findings, and reach out to compliant clients to get more information on how you can implement this into your cases. This will definitely help you out. All right, so we have another presenter today. All right, our next presenter is going to kind of put everything together. He's a personal injury attorney, Harold Ehrenberg from Covington, Louisiana. And Harold opened his personal injury focused law practice in 2002 after many years of experience handling injured patients as a chiropractor. So he has a unique perspective into this as a treating chiropractor as well as a personal injury attorney. So the value of his dual education has proved immeasurable to his clients who've benefited in terms of receiving fair value for their claims. He's successfully represented clients injured in automobile, 18-wheeler, bus, motorcycle, bicycle collisions, and accidents involving pedestrians. He's collected over millions of dollars for his clients who've been injured at work or in accidents, and he maintains a network of highly qualified practitioners in all areas of healthcare to ensure his clients get easy access to quality providers. So I'm very excited to have him as well here today to get his take on how this just one little slice of gaps or non-compliance can have an effect on the cases. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Harold. Take it away. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Tauber. Let me just say this, is I did practice chiropractic for quite a number of years, several decades, then I became an attorney. My practice was primarily a family practice, but we did have about 15%, 20% maybe that was personal injury. And it really wasn't until I became an attorney and started resolving cases for my clients that I realized some of the problems that I created and some of the issues that I didn't handle as a chiropractor. So they've gotten all cleaned up, and I think I really do come from a unique perspective, having practiced chiropractic and knowing all the things that I did wrong, and now helping other chiropractors get all of their protocols and alignment to make all of our case resolutions so much easier. So this afternoon, I don't want to talk about case killers. What I want to talk about is case enhancers, things that you can do in your practice that will really increase your collections. What we've identified over the years are examinations, documentation, advanced imaging, co-management, causation, communication, and compliance. Really getting these protocols in order in your office will substantially improve the value of the claim for the attorneys that you're dealing with, and as such can likely reduce the likelihood of you being asked for a fee reduction. And I know that's what all chiropractors want. So for this afternoon, the three things that I want to focus on are advanced imaging, communication, and compliance, because all three are so closely tied together. Advanced imaging. Chiropractors have a history of delaying MRIs, waiting for MRIs for an extended period of time. Why would you wait 6 months to order an MRI of the cervical spine to accurately diagnose your patient's condition? Now, I understand that if you're seeing a patient with health insurance and you want to get an MRI approved by the insurance company, you really do have to jump through a lot of hoops, and it can be very time consuming and frustrating. More often than not, you'll be asked whether or not the patient has had 6 months worth of conservative treatment, or if there's the presence of radicular symptoms before an MRI can get approved. Well, not so with a personal injury case. When you recommend an MRI, and when we get the prescription for the MRI, that recommendation, as long as there's the funds available, getting it approved and scheduled should really only take a day. It's really very, very easy. Chiropractors are the only providers hesitant to order an MRI. I think it's really, really important to understand that the absence of an MRI is a negative MRI. Geico, Progressive, State Farm, Allstate, they look into a file when it's time to resolve the claim and they see that there's no MRI, the presumption is that it's negative. There's not going to be an adjuster that's going to look at a file and read that there's low back pain, see that there's no MRI, and then go, oh my goodness, we have to play this claim as though there's a herniated disc because likely there was. That's just not the case. The case is that the default is that no MRI is a negative MRI. With regard to scheduling appointments with orthopedists and neurosurgeons for spine evaluations, we can't unless there's already an MRI in hand. They take the viewpoint that, well, on their first visit, they're going to, if there's no MRI, they're going to request an MRI. So why waste time? So with most of the physicians that we deal with, we already have to have one in hand before we even schedule the appointment. And so importantly, advanced imaging means increased value, and attorneys will be less likely to reduce your fee when you're doing everything right and you're finding the root of all the causes of the patient's problem. Just for example, it's very, very common for us to get diagnoses from chiropractors of sprains and strains and segmental dysfunctions with no advanced imaging. And those claims may be worth in the thousands of dollars. Whereas with just a little bit more investigation, but just ordering that MRI, and if the MRI comes back positive and if that patient is treated appropriately from there, if, for example, there's a herniated disc, that thousands of dollars worth of the case may turn into hundreds, sometimes many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of value. So that's important. And again, the more that you can help the attorney help his client, the more likely he is going to be to want to refer back to you. That's who he's going to refer to. He's going to refer to the chiropractors, the physicians that make his life, make her life just a whole heck of a lot easier. We had a client named Heidi, who I'll mention a couple of times throughout this little presentation, who was rear-ended by an 18-wheeler and hurt her back and her right shoulder. And the chiropractor wanted her to get an MRI and had suggested an MRI, but she never did. She did. We'll get to that point in a little bit, but she didn't. She didn't get the MRI. His diagnosis was for both. For her low back was a sprain strain, and for her shoulder was also a sprain strain. So we were thinking of the what it was worth in terms of recovery during the time that she was seeing the chiropractor. With regard to communication, generally the chiropractor sees the patient client and talks to the patient a lot more than the attorneys do. And we see our clients when we sign them up, and we talk to them periodically throughout the course of their treatment, and then we talk to them a lot more when it's getting closer to resolve their claim. But if they're coming into your office twice a week, 3 times a week for several months, you have the opportunity to speak to them a lot. And oftentimes they'll disclose to you a lot more than what they'll disclose to attorneys. They may tell you that, and they won't tell us, but they may tell you that they're going on a snow skiing vacation, or they're going whitewater rafting, or they're going hang gliding at the beach. And things like that could be very, very important for the lawyer to know. In fact, Heidi, during the course of her treatment, went to Colorado and posted on her Facebook, and Dr. Talbert had mentioned social media, but posted on her Facebook pictures of her looking just as happy as she could be in a blue and green and silver snow outfit on top of a mountain with her with the snow poles. And then there were subsequent pictures of her at the bottom of the mountain, her high-fiving her boyfriend. And when we found out about it and we asked her about it, she said, well, she just went to the top just to be there in support of her boyfriend who skied down, and she didn't ski down herself. And in our discussion, we said, well, Heidi, that may be true, but the optics of that are pretty bad. But we found out about that because the chiropractor's front desk CA was a friend of hers on social media, and it was communicated to us. So communication is very important because they're so much more likely to disclose things to you that we'll never find about. More communication is always better than less communication. We've never chastised a chiropractic office for calling us too much, telling us what was going on with a patient. And in resolving these issues, resolving any kind of issues like this, it just means more increased value to the claim, and attorneys, of course, will be less likely to reduce your fee and more likely to continue referring to you. With regard to compliance, this can so make or break your case, and I know that this has been the focus of this presentation this afternoon. Did the patient miss their first appointment and not come in for a month? That's happened to us. We've scheduled patients, and lo and behold, we'll find out. We'll call the chiropractor, we'll call the patient, and find out they haven't been there yet. It's been a month, and that's hard to deal with. It's very hard to deal with. First of all, it makes it look as though, and Dr. Talbert mentioned this, that they weren't treating their case very seriously, their injuries very seriously, and also in that month's time, it's plenty of time for an intervening injury to occur that could really throw a monkey wrench into the case that we're representing the client for. Is the patient skipping weeks at a time and just coming in on his or her own schedule? Back many, many years ago, one of our first clients was referred to us by a chiropractor who really didn't see any personal injury at all. His father was a family practice chiropractor, and he also was a family practice chiropractor. But he referred us to this patient that had been involved in a car accident, and perhaps we didn't do as much follow-up with the patient as we should have, but we found out a couple of months later that probably about 3 or 4 months later, that there were 2 one-month gaps in treatment. And I just thought, well, it would have been nice if we would have found out about this. It would have been nice if the patient was compliant, and it would have been nice if the chiropractor had let us know about this. So we got all the notes. The patient was discharged without all the notes, and we were looking at the notes. And exactly as Dr. Talbert had mentioned before, this chiropractor routinely recommended home exercises on his first visit, not because there was a personal injury case, but because as a chiropractor treating somebody with back or neck pain or whatever the injuries happen to be, that's just what he did as a matter of course. And not only did he do that, but the patient missed, like I mentioned, a month's worth of treatment. When the patient returned, it was noted in his file that he asked the patient if she had maintained the exercises that he prescribed on day 1. And she said yes, and there was a nice notation that she was continuing with the prescribed treatment of whatever the exercises were 3 times a week. And then the same thing for the second gap of treatment, that was a month. And we wound up submitting all of this to the insurance company in our demand, and it was as though there was no gap whatsoever because she had maintained continuity of sorts. Perhaps she wasn't in his office, but that was okay. She still maintained active treatment. The same thing, well, very similar, occurs if you're co-managing a patient and with a physician who's prescribing medication. If the patient misses your office, unfortunately, bottom line is when there are issues, you can call the attorney right away. Attorneys can handle this. Attorneys can really fix by talking to the patient, providing transportation, whatever the case may be. And that's just so important. Compliance means increased value, and that means attorneys will be less likely to reduce your fee and continue referring the patients that you need to see. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Tower.
Okay, thank you. All right, so if you have any questions, I'm going to look for some questions here, and hopefully you've put them in there. We've got a few here to look at right off the bat. Okay. One question, what is the importance of a disc injury on MRI? Where is it that in the hierarchy? What in the legal world is the disc attempting to show? 50% of people have disc injuries, walking around with no pain. That's a normal finding. I'm not sure what the importance of the MRI is. You got a long question here, Doc. What legal perspective are you aiming to get to? That's for you, Harold. So I guess the bottom line is, what's the big deal about an MRI and a disc when 50% of the people are walking around with them already?
Well, a lot. First of all, I think from a medical legal viewpoint, if the patient has never been symptomatic, just fundamentally, if the patient hasn't been symptomatic before, and then they're involved in a motor vehicle collision or whatever the accident happens to be, and they become symptomatic, and an MRI is performed and there's a herniated disc, well, perhaps you can't say that the accident caused the herniated disc, but you can certainly say that the herniated disc made it become symptomatic. Also, with the radiologists that we work with, we're fortunate enough to have radiologists that identify high intensity zones, which very, very often can date an injury. Excuse me, our neurosurgeons will say the same thing, that when there's high intensity zones present with a herniated disc, that they're more often than not traumatically induced as opposed to just chronic. With regard to the value of the claim, well, it sends the patient up the food chain, so to speak, to, I hate to say this, but to more invasive providers, or whether it's an orthopedist or pain management or neurosurgeon, and that seems to up the value of the claim.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question here for Dr. Patel, but before I mention that, I just want to say that our job as providers are to probe and to help objectify the patient's injuries. And even if people are walking around with discs, as Harold said, it could have been totally asymptomatic, which leads to a whole nother procedures of pre-accident and post-accident medical records. And they could have remained asymptomatic if not for the accident that now made it symptomatic. So our job is not to argue that legally, that's the representing attorney's job, but as providers, clinically, we want to obviously identify and work our patients up and get them the care that they need and give the attorneys what they call medical evidence. We call either objective biomarkers or objective findings. So just because people have certain things already pre-existing, and it gets into like the eggshell and the thin skull doctrine and things like that, we take our patients as is. Question for you, Dr. Patel. What areas do you offer transportation and pharmacy coverage?
Yeah, great question. It is nationwide. Our pharmacy card is accepted at thousands of pharmacies, Amazon, PillPack, CVS, Walgreens. We're accepted in all states, and so is our transportation. It's very important also to know, even if you have a patient that's literally living in the sticks, we can still service them because we don't just depend on Lyft and Uber. We provide transportation where they don't even go. We'll arrange private contractors to go pick them up from somewhere, and they can even wait with them at the appointment if they need that much hand-holding before taking them home. Great question.
Thank you, thank you. This one I think is probably best for you, Harold. What's the best way to document missed appointments so it doesn't screw up the case?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by documenting a missed appointment. If someone,
well, somebody's like, you know, I guess they're trying to say, like, if somebody is missing, where do you put it in the patient's file so it doesn't become an issue, even though it's already an issue? I mean, how do you, is it best to put it in the file? Is it best to put it in just in the computer?
Yeah, I don't know if I would really document that the patient missed an appointment in the medical records. It's kind of, it's already on your appointment book that the patient was scheduled and didn't show up, and it's going to show up in the records that there was just an absence. of a day or two or a week or two or whatever. We had just real quickly, one of our chiropractors contacts us anytime a patient by the end of the day. If the patient hasn't made it in, if it's a no-show, the chiropractor will contact us so we can get in touch with the client and get them back on track.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good communication. As Harold said, more communication is better than less. If you are writing things down and taking some good notes, one of the main complaints that attorneys have when it comes to providers is that there's not enough communication. So you can take that as a takeaway. This one is for you, Doc Patel. Does compliant clients work with attorneys in accepting reductions?
Absolutely. That's a great question, commonly asked. Not all cases go the way we all want them to. Reductions are a nature of being in the personal injury business. So absolutely, we definitely work with attorneys to resolve the case successfully and expediently according to their client's wishes.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, some stuff coming in here. Some people saying great information, even though they were only able to jump on at the very end. But remember, you'll get the recording once it's all processed and everything. Here's a question. I'm not sure if there's any. What percentage of patients have negative MRIs but have far worse issues? AMA guidelines. That's a good question. I think I'll just go with it. Negative MRIs, well, you don't know, but a negative MRI is not always a negative. As Harold had mentioned earlier, every MRI that you don't do is considered negative, and that's a quote that was told to me by a former State Farm defense attorney who's now a plaintiff attorney. So it's like every MRI you don't do, as Harold mentioned, is considered negative. But there are other issues such as ligament instability, ligament laxity that are in the AMA guides that are not going to show up on an MRI, and that's a whole another webinar. But yeah, I mean, MRIs and just advanced diagnostic, I don't want to focus exclusively on MRIs. There's a lot of advanced diagnostic imaging that can benefit your cases. To think that you can identify all of your patients' trauma-related injuries from your physical examination and some plain films, I don't think that's the case, and nobody really thinks that's the case, that there are injuries when people are involved in traumas that are significant that need to, what I like to call, look under the hood. You take your car to a mechanic, they say, I'd love to fix your car, but you can't look under the hood, you probably wouldn't use that mechanic, right? So one more question here. I know, hang in there. I know we're coming right up against the top of the hour, and I appreciate you hanging around there. What kind of communication do most attorneys prefer, such as a telephone call or email or talking to the paralegal when discussing gaps or patient noncompliance? Give that to you, Harold.
I prefer a phone call. I
Okay.
prefer a phone call because the phone call is going to go to our office administrator who can field these things. And I think it's just a lot easier. If it becomes an issue, then I don't mind answering emails at all. But the most expedient way is probably just a phone call.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Very good. All right, let's see if there's any last questions. Okay. Well, with that, doesn't look like there's any more questions. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank our panel, Dr. Patel, Dr. Ehrenberg, for their great insight and their information. And with that, we are going to wrap it up, and hopefully we'll see you guys on another webinar in the future. So thank you again, everyone. Take care, make it a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.